Hello, I am the Script Doctor and welcome to the channel. When writing a story, you want the audience to be asking questions about what happens next, looking towards the future of possibilities, not asking how does this work, trying to make sense of choices and how they can be reconciled with what has been firmly established. In writing for a franchise, it is paramount that whatever new information presented either builds on existing information or is something new and independent of what was established to expand the universe. Failing to achieve either of these two options could result in a contradiction or continuity error. Continuity is important with storytelling because it is part of the story's identity. It brings people together to form fandoms because it has a strong foundation that can support the weight of new ideas. It's helpful to know the architecture of storytelling because just like with a property, if you build too quickly or don't have a solid foundation, the whole thing becomes compromised. And the last thing an intellectual property needs is a form of identity crisis. This can happen when a writer doesn't build a new story on top of what has been established, but instead they build sideways and have to drill into the foundation to add supports so that the weight of the new addition doesn't pull the rest of the property off the cliff. And what happens is that as you keep writing, you find yourself having to build in two directions at once. Every new idea on top of the expansion requires additional supports to hold the weight. What was once a beautiful property that could continue to grow higher with each new story is now at risk of becoming a lopsided mess. And while some may find it ugly and others may find it beautiful, it is inconsequential at this point because it's not about the beauty but rather the integrity. Sure, you can pour in additional concrete, spackle, and add external supports, but that alters the property from a finished state to that of one that is in permanent renovation. It only highlights the changes of what came before, dominating the focus to one area instead of drawing the eye up the property to see what is new and admiring it as a whole. Yeah, there are many that will love the renovations and think it will improve the property overall, but one thing that is undeniable is that once the external support is put in place to keep the property standing, it can never be supported by the original foundation. So the beauty and strength of what the property once was will never be the same. And because of that fact, all it takes is one good pull for the whole thing to come crashing down. While there are many aspects in The Mandalorian to enjoy, especially in the recent chapter and how it connects to Rebels and the Clone Wars, it still has some issues narratively that I can't turn a blind eye to. So, in this week's review, we'll take a look at the good, the fun, and the bad as we check out Chapter 13, The Jedi. Please be advised that this review will contain spoilers. If you don't want to be spoiled, please feel free to return to my review after having seen the episode. We open the episode with a shot of an enclosed village on the planet Corvus, and I'm quite intrigued by what we see here, as we were told previously that this is a forest planet, but it looks to be more of a dying forest planet in actuality. There are smokestacks in the background, and it appears that some form of industry and lack of care has done some damage to the habitat. A gong is tolled and villagers within the walls hide in their homes as armed sentries file out into the desolate forest. We see in the distance blaster fire as the sentries engage with an invisible enemy. What started out as an attack has now become a retreat for the sentries as we are introduced to Ahsoka Tano slicing them down. There is some cool play with the lightsabers, along with some nice force power demonstrations. She uses the cover of the fog to surprise her enemies as she inches closer to the city walls. The leader of this city is Morgan Elsbeth, and she's been expecting Ahsoka. The context of this scene reveals that Morgan has information Ahsoka wants. Morgan brings out a prisoner to use as a threat to Ahsoka if she continues with her goal. But there is ambiguity to this action. So far in what we have seen at this point, we don't know much about Morgan. We don't know if this prisoner is an innocent, a criminal, or one of Morgan's men posing in an effort to deceive Ahsoka. Based on Morgan's first line of expecting Ahsoka, we know that she hasn't been here before, at least not recently. If this method is to be used as an effective means to deter Ahsoka from pursuing further action and play on this character's empathy, we would need something a bit more dramatic and cruel. Perhaps a means for Ahsoka to see a guard drag someone out of their home and hold them hostage, with their family members in fear of the outcome, so it goes beyond the individual's life but also plays into that person's public execution in front of their friends and family. Don't be afraid to show how cruel your villains can be. Vader strangled a guy and broke his neck before throwing his corpse into a wall. That's pretty disturbing on its own. It gets more disturbing when he does the same to those on his own side. But we don't have that here. It is all conveyed through assumptions, and an assumption is not really drama. Morgan starts a flimsy negotiation about the lives of those within her walls, but Ahsoka claims that their suffering will remain regardless of what action she takes and demands Morgan's surrender, then gives Morgan 1 day to agree. But why? Why go to all this trouble of defeating her sentries to stop and turn back? Why give her enemy time to formulate a new plan, or call for reinforcements? They are at what is perceived to be a standoff, and Ahsoka has already acknowledged that the people suffer, so why not continue to put the pressure on? Why not attack? Given what she has done just moments ago, what is Morgan to do? Any action Morgan takes would only delay the inevitable. If she uses all of her forces to defend the gate, they're going to be defeated, and then she has to give in to Ahsoka's demands. If she uses half of her sentries to protect her and the other half to execute the villagers, she's making the battle easier to get through for Ahsoka. Ahsoka would then take Morgan hostage and order her remaining sentries to stop the execution, or their leader dies. Ahsoka was also trained in the ways of the Jedi. Certainly, she could use a mind trick to distract or manipulate her men to her advantage. There are also droid guards for her to force crush their memory units and controls to make them useless. I see lots of options for success with Ahsoka, and none for Morgan. If Morgan kills that one prisoner, then she can't hold off Ahsoka, nor do I believe Ahsoka will give Morgan and those on that ledge enough time to communicate orders to kill the villagers in the city. From this brief exchange, we know that as far as Ahsoka is concerned, Morgan is the only one that needs to be alive, so those droids, that prisoner, and Michael Biehn are all expendable. What we have here is a case where we are told there is an impasse, but not shown one to definitely see Ahsoka at a disadvantage. The fact that we don't have that effective obstacle makes Ahsoka turning away a contrivance instead of her needing to come up with a new plan. If Morgan wants to use Ahsoka's compassion for others against her, she needs to present a more hopeless scenario. I would have put something personal in this. Perhaps Rex was a scout for Ahsoka who got captured and is strapped to a bomb on a dead man switch that Morgan controls. All Morgan would have to do is present Rex, have Ahsoka identify him to the audience to establish that they know each other, have Rex willing to sacrifice himself so Ahsoka can achieve her goal, thus putting Ahsoka in conflict, and the rest falls into place. Either that or a visual display for Ahsoka to see of every sentry in that town with their blasters drawn on the villagers, with the children crying and the parents in fear. Showing this group of 5 with one prisoner isolated from the rest of the village doesn't achieve the standoff the show is revealing. Their cause does not line up with the effect. Then we get this line.
We will be ready.
Which precludes they're not ready now. It's a good thing Ahsoka couldn't hear that, because this proves she could have powered through and got what she wanted. Plus, it also admits that, yes, they need time to regroup and fortify their defenses. What would have been awesome and really show the evil nature of Morgan is if, after Ahsoka leaves, she orders the death of that prisoner and the guards shoot him and throw his body over the edge by the front entrance. After the title sequence, the Mandalorian and the child drops out of hyperspace to approach Corvus. It's cute to see him sitting on the console next to the Mandalorian, and what we get in this scene is something that is pretty fascinating. We get another example of the child understanding the Mandalorian when he tells the kid to go to his seat and the kid actually does it. This is another piece of evidence showing a pattern that the child is understanding what the Mandalorian is saying. He may not be able to speak back, but we're seeing growth. The child doesn't have any facial cues or eye direction to receive from the Mandalorian because he's always wearing his helmet, so with only that one sense and maybe the occasional physicality, we have evidence that the child is learning. We got bits of this in the previous episode where the child is pulling the wires to try and fix the ship from the Mandalorian's instructions, unsuccessfully mind you, and also further back in Chapter 10 when the child leaves the ship to convey to the Mandalorian about the Frog Lady heading for the hot spring. And there is a reason I am bringing this up. Because since the first chapter, we know this child is 50 years old, yet it still acts like a baby. Some have argued that the child species has a different rate of mental growth, which would conflict with Yoda, who is of the same species. It would also conflict with the survivability rate of the species unless the planet they are from is the most docile in the galaxy, allowing them to be predators, which we don't know as of yet. But in this season alone, we have seen that in a relatively short time, the child is learning and developing its ability to communicate, and it doesn't appear to be any slower than a normal child in the early stages of learning movement and language, which begs the question as to why he's able to learn these things over his time with the Mandalorian but not prior. Is the child really 50 years in age, or was that an error on the Imperial's part? We are being shown some interesting examples that don't line up with the presumption that was made at the end of Chapter 1. While the Mandalorian lands the ship, the child spots the knob on the control and uses his force powers to remove it for him to hold. Once he lands, the Mandalorian takes back the knob from the child and heads to the front gate of town. He exchanges general details and intentions with Michael Biehn and is let into the village. As he strolls deeper inside, the villagers cower away, refusing to talk to him. He's approached by a guard that informs the Mandalorian that the magistrate, that's Morgan, wants to see him. He's taken through town past a couple of prisoners held in electric containment rings just outside the magistrate's home. He enters through the two secured doors to find Morgan feeding some aquatic creatures and requests the Mandalorian exterminate the Jedi that has been plaguing her. She's offering him, as payment, a spear of pure Beskar. What I enjoy about this scene is the dramatic irony. Morgan has no idea that the Mandalorian is looking for the Jedi on this planet, and now she's giving him a lead to find her. He travels through the scorched forest and gets a bead on Ahsoka. He places the child on a rock and is on the defensive as Ahsoka attacks him from behind. What I find quite awesome with this fight is we see the durability of the Beskar. It is virtually unaffected by the lightsaber. I also enjoyed that this fight was short, quick, and not overtly fancy or drawn out. It was primarily physical, only one force power, and there wasn't a chance for more of them to be really used as the Mandalorian calls out her name and references Bo-Katan. This halts their fight and changes the subject to the child. We cut to nightfall where Ahsoka is with the child and the Mandalorian is pacing. It's very silent and oddly framed. Camera-wise, that is. It's an extreme two-shot of Ahsoka and the child. We get a minute and 44 seconds of pure silence with no creative camera work or music cues to give us intrigue, nothing to suggest inquiry or communication, just staring until the Mandalorian breaks the silence with a question. What we learn after that silence is Ahsoka has been, in a way, feeling the child's thoughts. So if that is what they were doing, why was the cinematography not indicative of that? When Luke and Vader are communicating after their fight on Bespin, we have these tight, reflective shots. We get that again in Return of the Jedi when Luke is on the shuttle passing by Vader's ship. Why not, when the same communication is occurring between Ahsoka and the child, do we not get anything similar, or at the very least, creative? Something to better build up the exposition that will follow. In this exposition, we learn the child's name, Grogu. We also learn that he was trained by many masters over the years as a Jedi on Coruscant. Not exactly sure how many years or at what age he started, but it was when the Empire rose to power that he was hidden away. Then his memory is dark and he was himself lost and alone. This is some useful information. We learn that he is from a time of the Old Republic during the Clone Wars, that he was trained in the ways of the Force, and that he was hidden for his own safety. The Mandalorian remarks about his powers, learns a little about the Force through parroted dialogue from the original trilogy, and reveals that he was quested to return Grogu to the Jedi, suggesting Ahsoka. Ahsoka deflects, stating that the Jedi fell a long time ago, but the Mandalorian reminds her that the Empire did as well, but they still hunt the child. He claims that the child needs her help. She says she'll test him in the morning. Test him? Why? What does testing him have to do with anything? Well, we find ourselves the following morning with them strolling through the hills for a cozy spot. I guess Morgan is feeling relieved as her one day to decide has now lapsed and Ahsoka was nowhere to be found. Ahsoka picks up the stone and carries it to Grogu using the Force. She asks Grogu to return the stone, but he drops it instead. She senses fear in Grogu and claims that he hid his abilities to survive over the years. How does that work, exactly? A creature less than a foot in height with little physical strength hides his abilities that could keep him alive and safe from enemies in order to survive? That's like a soldier on the front line of war trying to survive a skirmish by removing the bullets from their gun, and not in the needed squeezing the trigger kind of way, but by removing the magazine and burying it in a hole kind of way. This information is not an explanation, but rather a very poor excuse to rationalize why he's not more proficient in the Force, given the information we just learned a moment ago about being trained over the years by multiple Jedi Masters. Ahsoka decides to take a different approach, and use the Mandalorian as a conduit to get the child to use his powers to take the stone. While this is neat Jedi testing stuff, I don't understand its purpose and how it relates to the Mandalorian's mission. He found a Jedi. Even if there are those that want to argue she's not a Jedi because she left the Order, she still has their knowledge, their powers, and a connection to them. She's the closest person he's found that meets the parameters of his quest, thus completing what he was set out to do. He should be handing the child off to her and letting him know that he likes shiny objects and is always hungry and prefers raw eggs. But instead, we're eating up time showing us the child demonstrating his powers. When he fails to do so, Ahsoka requests that the Mandalorian connect with the child in some way to achieve the objective of taking the stone from his hand. The Mandalorian remembers the control knob from his ship and holds it out for the child. When he pulls the knob into his hand, the Mandalorian is thrilled. Ahsoka looks at him judgingly and claims that the child has formed an attachment to him. Lady, you just told the Mandalorian to connect with the child. Connections are attachments. And then she proclaims she cannot train him. Who's asking the child to be trained? The Mandalorian is only looking for you to hand off the child to his people. For lack of a better alternative, that is Ahsoka. This is a contrived conflict. The reason Ahsoka gives the Mandalorian why she cannot take him has to do with his training, but that is not a reason, that is an excuse. There is no obligation in place for this child to be trained. And to further the contrivance, the Mandalorian doesn't even bring that counter-argument up. Instead, they push this irrelevant aspect further by the two debating that he should be trained, with Ahsoka implying that another Darth Vader could rise if they continue. Also, what a terrible thing to say about Anakin, that the only reason he became Darth Vader is because he had an attachment. The one thing that is being overlooked is that all Jedi within the Order that we saw in the prequel trilogy have an attachment. Padawans are attached to their masters, and masters are attached to their Padawans. Every master acts as a surrogate parent to their student. They're not just learning the ways of the Jedi and the Force, but about life, themselves, and the galaxy. Just like how a child learns about life, themselves, and the world through their parents. If there was no attachment, Obi-Wan would feel nothing when Qui-Gon is stabbed in the chest by Darth Maul. Yoda would not care to bring up a past relationship between him and Dooku, and Obi-Wan would not give that speech to Anakin after chopping his arm and legs off. The concept of the Jedi not having attachments appears to be broken by all the Jedi we've seen in this franchise. It is a rule that the infrastructure of the Jedi cannot uphold because the foundation of a master and apprentice relationship will always come with an attachment. Now, if Ahsoka said something more in line of, he's attached to the Mandalorian and resistant to her, then I'd be more inclined to understand the refusal to train part. But that brings us back to the same contrivance, the training. It's not a valid reason to keep the Mandalorian and the child together. A valid reason would be that the Mandalorian doesn't see Ahsoka fit to take care of the child. He may recognize her as a Jedi, but if he doesn't see in her the maturity or behavior to properly care for the child and keep him safe, then he has a reason to reject her as the handoff and keep searching for a Jedi that he can trust with the child. I don't think that alternative would be worse to Ahsoka's character given that she's rejecting the child anyway. The decision for the child to remain should be the Mandalorian's, not her. After rejecting the child, she says this very dangerous line.
Better to let his abilities fade.
Yeah, that line is going to bite the franchise in the butt something fierce down the road. Two issues with this. First, I can understand proficiency from lack of use decreasing over time, but not the knowledge of how to do it, short of the mental decline that can come as one approaches the end of their life. Second, this species is very long-lived. What if it takes centuries for his abilities to fade? What if beyond the Mandalorian's lifetime the child finds himself among Jedi that decide to complete his training, thus risking the very conflict Ahsoka wanted to avoid? By presenting the idea that Jedi abilities can fade, you open up the world to allow anyone in the franchise who learns the Force a way for them to lose it. Even if that character is at their peak as a Jedi, a writer can use this scene and make a claim that the Force has faded within that character and take it away for whatever reason they deem fit at that time. They've already incorporated the idea of using the Force so much that it kills Jedi. Now, because of this line, there is a path for the Force to vanish from a Jedi, either by using it too much but not enough to kill themselves, or using it not enough and thus losing the connection, which means one would have to create a measurement of exactly how often a Jedi must use the Force to hold on to such a connection. It's further complicating what was once a simple idea. It is a lesson I enjoy repeating. Characters are the only part of the story that should be complicated. Plots should be simple. Ideas should be simple. Settings should be simple. Complex characters make all those simple aspects bigger and deeper than they appear, and do so without confusing your audience of what is happening in the story. Speaking of story, Ahsoka remembers she has one and starts her journey back to the village. The Mandalorian reveals that Morgan, the magistrate, sent him to kill her. He uses this as a bargaining chip for the child. He helps her with the magistrate and she takes the child. Yeah, it's another transaction subplot. Well, at least it's the Mandalorian setting the terms this time. As the two make their way back, the Mandalorian reveals that Morgan has a small contingent of guards, 2 assassin droids, and a hired gunfighter. So, in other words, not enough to have stopped Ahsoka in the first place had she rushed the village in the opening act.
Combined, not even your laser swords would be able to protect you from all that firepower.
You weren't here at the start of the episode, Mandalorian. She may have used the cover of night, but she took out those sentries without breaking a sweat, and from your description, she can liberate the village just as easily. We get a little bit of exposition about Morgan, how she mines worlds to build the Imperial Starfleet. The Mandalorian suggests that she's still in business based on the look of what was once the forest world of Corvus. From this conversation, we as an audience can infer that Morgan is building ships for someone, which precludes a looming threat, and I like looming threats in my fiction. Ahsoka asks the Mandalorian about any prisoners and remarks that they must be freed, but regardless of the ones that are in those electric binding rings, isn't that entire village technically held prisoner by Morgan? Why is the episode narrowing the stakes? If I was only casually watching, I would think their plan was to free those 3 prisoners and let the villagers fend for themselves. We leave this scene to enter our big action set piece for the episode. Ahsoka approaches the front gate where 6 guards watch over the entrance. When they spot Ahsoka on approach, one of them sounds the alarm as the others open fire. She quickly dispatches them and destroys the bell. More sentries along with Michael Biehn block the entrance to Morgan's home. Let's see how many she's facing off here.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Some take aim, but Morgan orders them to hold their fire. What a silly action. She's taken out your sentries from the first assault, then 6 just now. You really think this last dozen stands a chance? Well, they let Ahsoka get quite close to the entrance, where she tosses a piece of the Mandalorian's armor at their feet to claim their warrior failed. She demands to know the location of Morgan's master. Finally, Morgan orders Ahsoka's death, but she leaps to the rooftops to deflect and destroy the attacking sentries.
Combined, not even your laser swords would be able to protect you from all that firepower.
Looks like she's got everything under control here, so much for that hollow assessment threat. Ahsoka hides within the village, drawing all the guards away from protecting Morgan, which is really foolish because she should have at least a couple by her side as sacrifices so she can kill Ahsoka herself. It's basic evil bad guy thinking. The main purpose of hired goons is to kill your enemies or distract your enemies by getting killed by them so you can come up from behind and kill the enemy yourself. But no, instead she orders the remaining sentries to kill the prisoners and then the rest of the village. Once she returns to her home, the Mandalorian drops in on his jetpack and takes out the 2 remaining sentries before they can harm the villagers. An old townsfolk comes out to help the Mandalorian free those in the electric rings as Ahsoka picks off the sentries one at a time. All I can think of at this point is how she could have done this initially at the start of the episode. It would have been easier too, as Morgan was on the front line and would not have a chance to retreat to her homestead. After she's dispatched a bunch of the sentries, she has a quick skirmish with Michael Biehn and 2 assassin droids, taking one of them out before retreating to the shadows. Michael Biehn returns to the main street where he's face to face with the Mandalorian and sees Ahsoka hop over the wall to face Morgan. The fight between Ahsoka and Morgan is probably one of the more nonsensical fights we've seen in Star Wars. It is in no way reckless looking like in the sequel trilogy, but rather doesn't make sense on a strategic level. Ahsoka has her 2 sabers and Morgan has a spear. When I see that concept for a fight, I don't expect the person with the spear to be using it to chop at her enemy, but rather stab and poke from a distance. It is a long-reaching melee weapon. It should be used to keep Ahsoka at bay. But Morgan wields it like a bludgeoning weapon, rarely making any stabbing motions, and it causes me to think that this character doesn't know how to fight and is therefore not a threat to Ahsoka. The other aspect to wonder is that this fight is between a Force user and a non-Force user. Unlike a Mandalorian who is protected by Beskar and has a collection of weapons of different types, Morgan's not really comparable to Ahsoka. She should have no issues force throwing, pulling, choking, or disarming Morgan at all in this fight, yet we have one because the writer and director thinks it's cool. And don't get me wrong, a fight between these 2 characters should be cool, but because of the things I mentioned, does the fight really have any stakes for Ahsoka? Are we really to believe that she is at risk? The answer is no. So how can we make this fight better so that our audience can be properly invested and on an emotional roller coaster as it progresses? I would suggest introducing the Ysalamir, a lizard-like creature that has the ability to create a force-neutralizing bubble, thus taking Ahsoka's advantage over Morgan away and compelling them to have a more fair fight. Then I'd use the brilliance of Diana Lee Inosanto, who plays Morgan, to give us a proper fight between 2 lightsabers and a spear. Lots of her stabbing at Ahsoka and blocking attacks while also throwing in some kicks and punches. Really spice it up and make it look like Ahsoka could lose. That way, when she wins, which is the case here, the audience can let out a sigh of relief because Ahsoka demands to know where Grand Admiral Thrawn is hiding, thus causing the audience to gasp once again. These 2 have a standoff and the Mandalorian shoots Michael Biehn. What a waste. So after that set piece, the sky is brighter and the village is freed. Ahsoka offers the Mandalorian the spear. After all, either himself or Bo-Katan is going to need that when they fight Moff Gideon later on. The Mandalorian leaves Ahsoka to retrieve the child she agreed to take in exchange for his help. On his ship, he finds the child sleeping in a hammock and gently wakes him up to hand him off to Ahsoka. We get a crossfade to the Mandalorian sitting with the child in his lap, showing a hesitation of him saying goodbye. As they finally leave the ship, Ahsoka appears and remarks how the Mandalorian is like a father to the child, then refuses to take him. When the Mandalorian challenges her change of mind, she offers an alternative and tells him to go to the planet Tython, where the child will be able to reach out to any Jedi that are left. If they feel him, they will come, and he will be reunited with his people. The Mandalorian returns to his ship with the child, and the two are off, presumably to Tython. And that's the end of the episode. And much like with Chapter 3, this also came across as a backdoor pilot for an Ahsoka Tano show. This version was slightly inverted, having the Mandalorian set the terms for the exchange of the favors, but like with the other episodes that have aired thus far, it does have its enjoyable moments. I like the bits between the Mandalorian and the child, how they've gotten a connection, and the child is better demonstrating his understanding of the Mandalorian. The stuff with Ahsoka felt more functionary as exposition and not so much in the ways of character exploration. I did like that for the set piece, they went in a different direction by having Ahsoka enter the village and deceiving Morgan with the idea of defeating the Mandalorian, as opposed to the Mandalorian entering the village with the body of Ahsoka. I also think the structure of this episode sort of hurt the pacing. Had it started with the Mandalorian arriving first, then being tasked to kill the Jedi, and from there we recut the opening to be part of the joint onslaught on the village, I think the episode would have had a better flow. It would allow us to understand that Ahsoka has been hesitant to attack because the village is under garrison by Morgan, but now that the Mandalorian is here, they have a better chance to liberate the people and Ahsoka getting the information she needs. Having a protagonist start their goal only to stop and take a break conveys that they may not be as committed to the goal as they should be, and that can reflect poorly on the protagonist. As I said at the start, when writing a franchise, the story's focus should be what happens next, and the new information should not cause issues for the audience to reconcile how that new information fits in with what happened before. This episode struggles with that, primarily with the hints at the child's background and his current standing. If he has been trained for years and was hidden prior to the rise of the Galactic Empire, why is he in such a regressive state? Why are his skills in the Force more underdeveloped than Ahsoka's, who has also been training during the same time as the child? And as the child is 5 years older than Ahsoka, he should have at most 5 years more training prior to him being hidden. While it does set up questions to explore, it's not about looking forward, but looking back. Will this information that may one day be revealed make sense with regards to what is happening now? It's making The Mandalorian appear more like a story that can't decide whether to move forwards or stay still and look backwards. There's only 3 episodes left, and I suppose 2 plot points that could be addressed. The first, returning to Tython for the child to choose his path, and the second, the return of Moff Gideon to take the child. It feels like we're going to get a repetition of what we saw from last season, with a final setup episode and a 2-parter to close it out. I hope the next few episodes bring in something new and fresh, and not rely too much on established characters from other series. While this season is stronger than the previous one because of the simple goal of reuniting the child with his people, it's not really bringing anything new to the Star Wars franchise. Much like the first season, out of what we've seen so far, there's only been 2 episodes worth of content that actually progressed the story, and I fear because of that, the final 3 may be packed with a lot of story and little time for it to settle in. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. If you have anything to add to this episode, please leave a comment below. Thank you for watching, and never forget, it all starts with the script.